is very different now than when I started in 2005. And so it really helps for my students that are mostly freshmen to see someone who has, they have more shared and lived experiences with. And also, they're really good sometimes at taking what I do and kind of helping put it more in student speak and helping make the material more student friendly. And so every class except one that I've taught since I've been at AUM has had a peer mentor, and they've all been fantastic.
Let's go with Brittany next. Heather, there she is, she's here. Heather, you didn't miss anything. We're on the first question. We're just talking about some of the benefits that you've seen for the students in your class by having a peer mentor. So Paul was the only one that talked. So we'll get to you here in a second. Go ahead, Brittany.
Cool. Well, in addition to what Paul just shared, I think one of the benefits that really, I guess you could say, make my heart happy is that peer mentors, they boost morale and help build community, especially, I like the fact that they boost morale when you have peer mentors who are dedicated during really stressful periods, such as midterms and final exams. So when I find myself feeling a little deflated in that I can't get students energized and okay guys, let's get into this. The peer mentor oftentimes can do it, and perhaps because they are a peer, they're a college student as well. I found that peer mentors, as Paul said, like he said, they can translate the material into student speak. But it's just, I guess it's just, again, because I myself have been out of college for a while as well. It's just something about their presence in the classroom in terms of, again, community building, socialization, just helping the students get connected and feel like, hey, here's another student who's more senior than me. They seem to belong and fit here. If they can do it, if they've taken this class, then I can fit and belong as well. So there's that aspect of helping increase students' belonging as well in our classrooms and in the AUM community as well, more broadly.
All right, Katie, you get to go next since you were here on time.
Cool. Well, I agree with everything that my colleagues have mentioned, especially the morale that Brittany just mentioned. The spring was like an especially grueling semester, and I heard that from faculty kind of across campus. There's just something in the air, I think. And so I really relied on my peer mentor in the spring to help get us kind of to sort of raise the mood in the room. These students who seek out the opportunity to be a peer mentor tend to be the kind of students that are good at that kind of thing, connecting with other students, being sort of proactive. And so it's in my experience a really good crew of folks. And I'll also say that because this was my first year here at AUM, there's a lot that I didn't know. Basic stuff, where things were, how certain offices worked. And so there were sometimes, especially when it came to student life stuff about the dorms, about clubs and events, stuff that as a new faculty member, I didn't have as much access to. My peer mentors were also really useful for helping me know what's going on around campus. They would, kind of jump in and offer like, oh, well, there's this person in this office you can talk to, or there's this event coming up this week. And they were often aware and kind of plugged in to student life on campus in a way that I wasn't, and was especially difficult kind of being new. But that was kind of my biggest takeaways from the benefits of working with these peer mentors this year.
Go ahead, Heather.
Well, in addition to everything that everyone has said that I've heard, I agree with all of that. In particular, I just don't know how the dorm, residence life really works, and some of the issues that students have had. It has been so beneficial to have peer mentors who are part of that part of campus. So that has been really helpful. I would say the two things that stick out to me are that a lot of times my peer mentors will pick up on students not necessarily understanding the way that I have worded something, or, the assignment sheet or something like that. And so they kind of break away that anxiety, and they can ask questions to make sure they understand what students are being asked to do. And a lot of times I'll have students in class who would never have asked the question. some of whom may not have even known how to formulate their confusion into a question. So having an example of that, and seeing someone ask questions and seeing that it's okay to not be totally clear on what you're being asked to do after reading an assignment sheet, even if you've been here for a long time, right? You might always have questions, and that's okay. In addition to the second thing being, a lot of my peer mentors have been in very demanding majors and have been honest with our class on the struggles that they have faced. I think a lot of students, particularly freshmen, particularly first generation, sometimes come in with this idea of, if I start to struggle, it means I'm not good enough and it means I don't belong here. So going back to that belonging of, you're gonna struggle, you're gonna have times that are a lot harder than others, and seeing how upperclassmen manage that. And it's not that they don't ever struggle, it's that they know how to deal with it when they do. And I think that's been a really wonderful example for my students.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I really like the part where, we're showing how peer mentors bridge that gap between the professor and the students that we're teaching, either because we've been out of college ourselves for quite some time, or we're new, or we're not quite as familiar with some of the new resources that might be on campus. So awesome points. My next question is, when you have a new peer mentor that's going to be working with you in your course, how do you start to build that relationship with them and find out about their goals and set mutual goals for each other as you guys progress through the semester? And I'll open it to whoever wants to go ahead and start.
That beginning of semester conversation with a new peer mentor is one of my favorite parts of the semester, because it does several things. It gives me a chance to start thinking about what this role looks like for this peer mentor, because it's not a one-size-fits-all role. Some peer mentors have been really comfortable with this and not really with that. And so it gives me a chance to figure out really kind of where they fit in and how they can benefit the most. But also it gives me a chance to rethink how I do things in my class. And that's something that I really appreciate. And so we'll talk about, my peer mentors help me put my syllabus together. They'll look through Blackboard before I make it public and tell me if they see issues with it. And I really, I tell them at the beginning of the semester that not only are they helping coach and mentor the students in our class, but we're going to use some of our time, some of that weekly half hour that we have together, for me to check in on them and to see how they're doing, not just as the peer mentor, but just as a human being. I have students that I taught fall of 19 that are now veteran peer mentors that I get to work with. And those are, we've done mock interviews, we've done resume work, but it's just another student that I get to work with. And I really enjoy that.
I'll echo what Paul said in terms of starting to build that relationship with peer mentors, getting to know them as human beings, as individuals as well, and asking about them, and really utilizing, honestly, a good chunk of the weekly 30-minute meetings to check in on them, to make sure that they're taking care of themselves, that they're staying grounded, that they're not stretched too thin. And I'd add to that as well, being a first-year instructor here, coming up on my first year, just starting, that the peer mentors, when I first meet with them, if they had been a peer mentor before, I always like to ask them, how did things work in your previous classrooms, just so that I can gauge their prior experience with serving as a peer mentor, because I don't want them to get lost in the sauce in terms of, wait a minute, I thought that this looks this way. This is what Professor X did. And so during that very first meeting, I asked, okay, what was your experience like before? And then we move from there. And so I think that has helped me this past year with starting to build good relationships with my peer mentors.
And I would kind of add, I always like to ask that too. I like to ask students in particular, what about what we're talking about in this course really excites you? What is something that you really care about? But I pretty much full on give my peer mentors the same survey that I give my students. I ask about what they enjoy about their classes. I ask what their responsibilities are outside school to give me a fuller picture of sort of what they have going on and, different ways I might be able to support them. And one key thing I also really make sure I do is I reciprocate that information. So I share about myself with my peer mentors. That kind of relationship has to be reciprocal in order to really be cemented. And I think that that's where we sometimes forget that we can share some things, of course, keep those professional boundaries, but, my peer mentors know when I've had a tough week, I share that with them and I share with them how I work through that. And in doing that and sharing that information and genuinely caring about the peer mentor as a human being, first and foremost, I think that those relationships just follow. It's kind of inevitable. If you show that you care about someone and you invite them to get to know you as well, the relationship is going to form most likely very quickly after that.
Katie, do you have anything to add?
She may have a student in with her.
That's fine, no worries. Heather, thank you for bringing up that point about the sharing of yourself. And I think that's key to that relationship that you're building, because the mentor ultimately is there not just to help the students, but to gain experience and to kind of learn from you as a teacher or professor in that circumstance and gain some skills. So having that kind of more free exchange of communication kind of makes them feel like they are definitely, of the students in the hierarchy and have that extra level of responsibility and rapport building that they can do with you. Paul, I'm sorry, Heather, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, that's actually a component of trauma-informed education as well, and being a critical witness for your students. If we're asking our peer mentors to be vulnerable and share with us sort of their hopes and dreams and goals, we owe it to them to reciprocate that vulnerability and show them that we also have things we're striving for that we maybe haven't met. And like I said, the relationships just seem to follow really naturally at that point.
Good point. Thank you.
Yeah.
Paul, I'm going to come back to you, something that you started kind of talking about a little bit, how the student is actually involved in the process of that class, whether it be discussions or lecture. Tell me about that process that you have, and how much do you let the student in? Because we have some other folks here that might not be as familiar with different strategies that they could use.
Yeah. So I base kind of how we structure the peer mentor role in my classes a lot on work that I did previously with student teachers and with teacher education students. And so we do a lot of, we always talk about activities before we do them in class, because I want them to be able to help fill in the gap when I forget something or explain something just a little bit differently. So we always talk about something in our weekly meeting before we do it in class, because I also feel really strongly that it's my responsibility to not put them in an awkward position in class where they don't know how to respond or what they should be doing in a given moment. But we do a lot of, at the beginning of the semester, we'll kind of lead activities together. They'll watch and kind of join in and assist. Then they may help give some instructions, or we kind of work on the I do, we do, you do kind of model. And so they watch and practice. And then we always, anytime they take an increased role in an activity in class, we talk about it at that weekly meeting. And I give them feedback and they give me feedback. And so, which is really nice. I've changed things in the middle of a semester because of peer mentor feedback. But it also means getting to know the skills and levels of comfort that the peer mentor brings in at the beginning of the semester. I have had some peer mentors that they love being in front of the class and being the voice of wisdom and knowledge. I've had others who their role was the quiet floater, who they were always, when we do group work in class, they always found the student who didn't have another group to work with and they worked with them, or they do. So I always try to make sure I don't surprise them. And then we always talk about it before and afterwards. And then if I ever change anything in class, because I do that every now and then, I get a little impulsive, I always pull them aside while students are working or discussing something and talk to them about it beforehand. Because I don't want to catch them off guard.
Thank you. Anything else, ladies?
I would just, I guess, add to that, or to expound on what Paul was saying, in that, yes, I think all of us, we do involve our peer mentors to some degree in lesson planning. And there have been times where I have I'm sure that we've all been in the same boat, multiple activities or ideas, and I will flat out ask the peer mentor during our weekly meeting before the lesson, like, look, what do you think is going to hit more, so to speak? What's going to really resonate with them? What do you think won't bore them to death or whatnot? What do you think will be most useful? And so I have oftentimes scrapped an activity, just like Paul said, and went with something else, because the peer mentor said, you know what, if I were in their shoes, and when I was in their shoes, this is what helped me. So I wanted to add that I kind of followed their lead, so to speak, at times. And I have peer mentors. I have one currently now, and a previous one. They were really proactive about giving supplementary resources and material to students outside of class. My peer mentor this summer, like before I can even think about it, she's like, okay, so we're doing this. I'm going to go ahead and email the students this worksheet or this handout or these other materials before we even get to the lesson. So it depends. To Paul's point, that every peer mentor is different, and they'll oftentimes, if they do have a natural interest, they're oftentimes going to suggest something before you even bring it up.
I think a lot of this has to do with how you empower your peer mentor and you feeling comfortable with kind of letting that happen. And most of the time, if you let it happen, they'll surprise you and do way more than you even anticipate. And then also, even in my experience with using peer mentors in my own classrooms, they have their finger on the pulse of what's happening in the class, sometimes better than you do. And so if you have a plan, they can tell you, I think that's a little off the mark. I mean, of course, respectfully, but like maybe we need to go back just a hair and kind of review on this topic a little bit more, because they kind of seem confused. And then you can adjust a little bit based on them. So it's really good. It's like having another ear in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I might be a little bit different here. I think both Brittany and Paul are more organized than I am. So I don't typically involve my peer mentor in my planning. I usually ask them at the beginning of the semester what they would like to contribute to, but I think if it works for you to have your peer mentor involved in, picking out what they feel like students would connect with, I think that's fantastic. I don't think that if that's not your style, that's not necessary to having a good peer mentor experience in class. So I speak with my peer mentors, and they know that although I will come in with a plan for every class, I am 100% not married to that plan. And it will depend on what the students are showing me that they need in class as to what we will end up doing. So sometimes I go in with one activity planned, and it's clear based on, the short discussion that students are more interested in something else. And so what I really work with my peer mentors on is being able to go with the flow of what students need in the moment, and trying to learn how to evaluate in real time and come up with ways that we can adapt what we had kind of planned on doing to what students are demonstrating is a need in that moment. And so in this way, a lot of times what works with my peer mentors is a debrief. So rather than having them involved in the forward planning, we'll talk about, hey, what do you think worked well here? What maybe could we change? And I'll change that for next time. So that I just might be a little different in that. And so I wanted to share that difference of running it in case anyone listening is like me and a little bit chaotic and less prepared maybe, or planned ahead than Brittany and Paul.
That's a perfect point to make, because through this process, everybody's relationship with their peer mentor is going to be different. There's no 100% step-by-step, path that you have to follow with them. I think really just the key importance is making sure that you're touching base with your peer mentor to find out what it is that their goals are, and then working together to kind of see how you can still help them meet those goals, but yet meet the objectives that you have of the class, and having that good experience. Before we kind of go to another question, I want to see if any of our other participants have a question, because I know that this kind of area usually sparks some ideas or thoughts. Anybody?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Eric.
I have a peer mentor for fall class, or I expect to. I requested.
You've got Nicole, I promise.
Oh, okay, but thanks. But my question is not. It's not that. But my question is, I've never had a peer mentor in an online class before. So how is it different when it's an online class?
So I'm currently teaching an online class, and it can be tricky because sometimes, since I'm not seeing all my students and seeing the peer mentor, it can just be tricky to remember to make sure everyone's involved. But fortunately, I have a fantastic peer mentor. And one of the things I have my peer mentor do, I have my students doing weekly discussion posts. Alternates. Some weeks it's via text, like a regular Blackboard discussion post. Other weeks I make them do a video response. And I'm fortunate that summer peer mentors get a little bit more more hours. So Morgan actually goes through and comments on each student's post. So that way, no matter, if a certain student posted a little bit late and didn't get any responses from their peers, they do at least get one from her, usually one from me, but she's better about keeping up with it than I am. I kind of alternate weeks, but that's one way. She continues to enhance the conversation. Students often in online classes are very tempted to do the discussion boards where they just agree, or, I concur with so-and-so. And so she'll occasionally also pop in a question about what they had written in their discussion post, or point out something that she shared with them. And so I find that it is a little harder to engage peer mentors with online classes, but very possible, particularly if your peer mentor is, talkative and a little bit more willing to put themselves out there in text or video. I also have her occasionally do her own little videos. So she did a PowerPoint with voiceover a few weeks ago about managing your time when it comes to midterms, which isn't something that I specifically talk about. We talk about managing time, we talk about understanding assignments, but we don't necessarily talk specifically about how to manage that week or two with midterms. And so she took it on herself to do that this time.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions? All right. So one of the things that I hear a lot from some faculty members who are contemplating using a peer mentor is, I already have a lot going on. The idea of having this weekly meeting and now managing another person sounds like extra work that I don't necessarily have time for. Do you guys consider it to be extra work? Like, is it that much? What do new faculty getting a peer mentor have to expect? Anybody?
I find for me, and the way that I organize my own brain, it doesn't end up being more, typically because I'm not trying to make sure I get with them about what I'm doing next week. Like we do to a certain extent, but I don't involve them in the planning so much. So it's really more of a, hey, how do you think that class went? Oh, hey, how do you think this activity went in class? And it becomes such a service to me in finding out how effective my teaching is, that even though it might be a few more emails a week or 30 minutes that I set aside, it informs my teaching in such a way that the benefits so clearly outweigh any time, 30 minutes that I lose in terms of making sure I prioritize those meetings. So I find that it doesn't become more work at all, really. It just becomes a way of having someone who can help me prepare students to the best of our ability. And I find that to be incredibly beneficial. So I think, there's really no one way to use a peer mentor in a class. You can find what works for you. Typically, if it's a new person who I've never met, which might be the case for some people who are getting mentors for the first time, the first few weeks, they really usually just kind of sit and listen in class. And, we'll occasionally pop in, if they have something to say. I usually ask them if they're comfortable with me asking them questions right away. So it becomes a way to also get the class engaged, because once you break that seal of chatting, other people will often jump in. So, I think that all of the many benefits really outweigh the 30 extra minutes that you're spending a week to make sure everything's on track.
Definitely, Heather. I would echo that that statement, that point, that the benefits to me as well, they outweigh any cons or whatnot. And I also encourage other instructors to look for natural, organic ways to involve a peer mentor. I had a peer mentor this past year. She asked me randomly, like, hey, do you want me to take attendance every class? And she created the Excel sheet, and she was responsible for taking attendance at the beginning of every class. So she had that covered for me. And I just kind of come in and fill in any gaps that she didn't know about. For example, a student who emailed me and said, hey, not feeling so well today, etc. And those ways also might be having the peer mentor, again, do some of the work, to take the lighten the load for you, so they can pass out kits and materials for activities that day or for lab classes. They can collect stuff. Not to say that they are a workhorse, so to speak, but you can look for those ways in which they can do some of the tasks that you're doing when you don't have a peer mentor in your classroom.
Something that I'd say in addition is I've taught classes that had anywhere from 8 students to 36 students here. And in the larger classes, we've even, my peer mentors and I have even talked about, we're not going to be in the same part of the room at the same time, because we want to make sure that the students have access to one of us. And so in some ways they help kind of shoulder some of that responsibility, and it helps keep them more engaged, because we're always keeping tabs on where each other is. But it also, I've just learned over the course of semesters that some students, it's really different when the peer mentor comes to engage with them in a conversation than when I show up. And so, yeah, I think it's 30 minutes a week to sit down and talk with them, which for me is a great accountability, because I, earlier in my teaching career, was infamous for every lesson was planned the night before or the morning of. And knowing that I want to be able to run a few things by, it may not be I may not have every I dotted and T crossed by the time I meet with my peer mentor, but knowing that I want to talk through some of that with them helps hold me accountable to stay ahead a little bit in my class. And so that really is helpful.
Katie, do you have anything to add?
I was gonna say a similar thing to Paul, actually, about the planning. But I think that overall, yeah, the benefits in terms of what the peer mentors can bring certainly outweigh the, planning around meeting with them regularly. I think that really, in terms of either sort of planning our lessons and thinking ahead, and or sort of reflecting on how lessons go, having these meetings with peer mentors can be, they can provide a useful insight either into, how they think a lesson might go, if you want to run something by them, or feedback on kind of how something went in class. So, I mean, that is also how I use those meetings. It's interesting too, because if you're teaching a course, the student has taken the course, maybe they took the course with you, maybe they took it with someone else, but they might have sort of perspective. I mean, not that, they're going to tell you how to teach your class, and they shouldn't tell you how to teach your class. But, you know, they might say, oh, when I took this with, you know, Dr. Krasinski, we did this in class, and you know, it's an interesting sort of calibration around sort of getting the student experience feedback, sort of a feedback loop into your teaching, which I find really valuable. So, and you know, we get our little evals at the end of the semester, and those are not always the most helpful anyway. And so to have a student who's not being graded, but is in the class and observing the class and being part of the class, to have their kind of live feedback throughout the semester is also really, really useful.
So you guys went into one of my other questions. Go ahead, Brittany. Maybe you'll answer it for me. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know, but I just wanted to add, I think Heather might have mentioned, we have some really great students who sign up to be peer mentors and take on the job, and they are just lovely. So it's a nice change to the point of the 30-minute meeting and the burden it might seem to some, but it's just a nice change of pace to have that time set aside to have at least one student guaranteed to come see you, because let's face it, a lot of students, they don't come to office hours. We don't see them outside of the classroom. So it's nice to be able to have a highly motivated student, someone who's really invested in your doing well as the instructor and invested in the students in the class doing well to come and talk to you. So I just wanted to add that.
That's perfect. What I was going to say is that you guys did an awesome job of kind of going into some of the benefits, not just for the students in your class, but for you as the professor in that class. And that's definitely something that I found using a peer mentor, is that it was motivational to me as well, you know, where it kept me kind of accountable for my lesson planning. I got the opportunity to debrief to see what maybe didn't quite work, or I could have tweaked or done a little bit better, or might do differently later on down the line. And then, you know, I've always developed a really good, strong rapport with my peer mentors, and it was a positive thing. It kind of pushed me through the week a little bit and made me feel like, all right, I'm not doing as bad as I think I am, or I can kind of power through. So is there any other benefits that you guys can think of as a professor having a peer mentor in your class? Go ahead, Paul.
So one of them for me is, I know that what I see on like the tech side of Advisor Track or Webster or something like that is different than what students will see. And so one of the just standing responsibilities that that my peer mentors have, but that is really helpful for me, that helps me learn, is they will walk my students through, here's how you find your advisor and make an appointment, and then through them showing students, or how to register for classes, how to look up when Professor so-and-so is teaching this class. Then that helps refresh my memory when students come and ask those same questions. And so they help. That's how I learned how students make advising appointments and registered for classes here, is I watched my peer mentors tell my classes. I wouldn't know that without those kids.
Anybody else? One of the things that I'll also say too, you know, we kind of touched on it, you know, there is a gap sometimes, you know, in age between us and the students, right? And I'll age myself, but like, I didn't know what Group Me was a long time ago. This happened. It was my peer mentor that actually said, hey, this would be a great way to get the class together and be able to build community and have that, you know, communication where they could instantly get with me without having to go through email or what have you. And I was like, okay, sounds great. And it was the best thing ever. And then since then, I've always used some kind of way, like Group Me, to communicate with the entire class. And I put myself in there as well, but you know, they did their own thing. And having that peer mentor there to kind of man those smaller questions, like when does that really do? Or when do I have to do this, kind of took that weight off of me having to do it as well. So anything else you guys can think of benefit wise? No, I think we've covered. Any questions so far?
I have a question. We've talked about how the faculty member benefits and how the class benefits and the students benefit. But can you talk about the benefits to the peer mentors themselves? How do the peer mentors benefit from the experience?
So that was actually one thing I was thinking about answering for the last question, that it is really rewarding as a faculty member to witness the growth of the peer mentor. So I've had peer mentors. I'll give an example of a peer mentor I had. So her name was Grace, and I actually knew her really well because I had taught her in high school. And when she came to AUM, she was very disconnected from the campus. And she told me this, that she, really just came, took her classes and left, and didn't like that feeling and wanted to get more involved. So we talked about possibly becoming a peer mentor. She excelled beyond my wildest dreams. She was a great peer mentor and a great student. And she has actually decided now that she's considering going to get a further degree to teach, because she really enjoyed that relationship with students. So not only has that kind of helped her determine her possible future career path, which was something that she had kind of considered before, but had never had the experience of being in front of a class to know if that was really something that she would enjoy. But also I've seen her grow way more confident making connections on campus. She was president of the Dean's Circle. She, I believe, got a chancellor's something. But she really grew in her development, made a lot of connections here, was able to get really involved with her department, which was psychology, that she, that was not her intended major when she first came to AUM, but getting more involved with campus helped her find that major as well. And she also was a very nervous person. She was a little bit shy, but she can get up in front of a crowd and talk with authority now, which is something that I've been really proud to witness in her. So that's one example. I've seen it all throughout. In addition to knowing that there are faculty members who care about you, like really truly on campus. I know Paul and I have shared peer mentors before, one of whom just graduated. And even though he had not been my peer mentor for many semesters, he brought me his graduation announcement and was really honored to share that with me. And, there were times when I know that student in particular struggled with some of his coursework. And I know Paul had conversations with him. I had conversations with him, and, not saying that it's because of us, he worked through that. But I do think it might be because of some of the leadership skills he learned in class and learned by being a peer mentor. So I hope that answers your question to some extent, Dr. Sterling, and I'd love to hear anyone else's answers.
Thank you.
So I've had a few peer mentors who have been seniors. And one of the things that we do, especially towards the end of the semester where there's less planning and there's more kind of just maintenance stuff as we're going, as we get closer to final project time, is I do mock interviews with my peer mentors that are seniors. We go over resume stuff. We talk about, so what is the next step? And I've had some students where it's okay, let's use some of our time to look at, you're saying master's degree is your next step. Cool, let's look at options for you. And so it's, and you can do the same thing with students that aren't seniors, but that's been really beneficial. And I've been a reference for each one of those peer mentors who were seniors. And so that's been really beneficial for them, I hope, but also for me, because it helps grow my skill set, and it gives them a chance to practice how they want to portray themselves in the interview circle.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I want to briefly speak about my experience with peer mentors, because
Yeah.
I've dealt with them for at least the last year and a half. And I think I actually had Grace as a peer mentor in my intro to psych course. So I had a lot of experience with her. And she actually was really helpful because she kind of changed the way I interacted with peer mentors, because at first I didn't think about involving peer mentors as much, but she kind of showed me that, oh, well, peer mentors can actually do a lot. Because now going in with my peer mentors, the first thing I ask them is, okay, ultimately, what do you want to do? And what skills do you feel like you really want to work on? And I always try to find where I can pushed it into my lecture at some point. So whether it is they want to get more confident about speaking, a big way in which I do, especially for some of my peer mentors are really shy, is supplementary material. Like I get them to weekly pick one thing. It can either be something you feel comfortable with, or a lot of my peer mentors will do a poll with the students, and that's also how they increase their engagement. And I say, okay, if you had these 4 things, what 2 things would you like me to talk about? And then so I leave it completely up to them to decide creatively, how do you want to do it? Whether you do a regular voiceover lecture, whether you just have like some little pamphlet that you make up yourself, but either way it go, I'll let them decide specifically how they tackle that. And so by the end of it, and I know even with Grace specifically, by the end of the semester, I found that she was so much more confident and she was so much more on it when it came to interacting with students. So I feel like it's very helpful for them, because by the end, I tell them, not only is this to help the students, but I want this to be a growing process for you. How can I help you grow?
That's awesome. I would add to, in addition to increasing peer mentors' confidence, they end up making friends with some of the students in the class. And I'm seeing that currently, not to put my peer mentor out, she's wonderful, but I can definitely see the relationships lasting beyond this summer, this classroom. So in addition to their building leadership skills, becoming more confident, being more proactive, and just overall their personal development, I think they increase their belonging and their fit, so to speak, here too, because they end up meeting new people whom they otherwise might not meet if they weren't serving as a peer mentor.
One other thing that I'd throw out before I forget it is I've had some peer mentors that have where in our meetings, as I start to learn more, I can start to help connect them with other people on campus that are, I've had one student who wasn't my peer mentor, but I met with as a fill-in one week and was able to help connect her with one of the deans, and she became a student worker and was able to receive some scholarships and had a job reference from a dean when she was applying for a job when she graduated. And so I'm always looking for how can I help connect you with not just clubs and organizations and the students in class, but other offices and resources on campus.
You know, from the EEC standpoint, I mean, this is exactly why we do experiential education, is to give these peer mentors this opportunity that they wouldn't otherwise have to get an experience, build these relationships, network with professors, learn maybe that they want to increase their leadership skills, or that they want to not follow, you know, the career path that they were thinking that they were originally. You know, it's giving them that opportunity. And so, I mean, I think that in itself is like the biggest reason why, you know, peer mentors are happy with the position that they get, because they get all of that extra exposure. I can't tell you how many recommendations I've done over the years for peer mentors, and I still have contact with them even after graduation, you know, or now some of them, again, you know, just finished graduate school, and that's super cool to, you know, where they still want to get in contact with me and tell me about what's happening, and, you know, that we have that much rapport. So it's a beneficial thing for them and for the professor as well, for sure. Any other questions you guys can think of? Nothing from Eric? All right, so we have about 12 minutes left. The last thing that I want us to kind of talk about is, you know, not everything's going to be perfect, having a peer mentor. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've experienced? And then how did you overcome those? And I'll open it to whoever wants to go first.
I have a very good one for this. So my first, I believe it was my second semester here. So it was the semester where COVID hit. But in the beginning, one of my peer mentors told the class, as long as you show up to the first couple of classes and get on the attendance for financial aid, then teachers don't really care if you come or not. And as she said this out loud to the whole class, as I stood there and witnessed, I thought, what? At the time, I pointed out, I contradicted her very politely, and I said, actually, you know, that's not necessarily true. You need to make sure that your professors don't have an FA policy where if you miss more than a certain number of classes, you fail by default. You need to really consider this, and also consider the fact that you're paying for this. This is not just to get a grade, this is to learn skills that you'll use forever. And privately, I spoke with that peer mentor and reminded them that although that might be how they feel as a student, that when they're in the classroom, they are a representative of the university as an institution. And I think that sort of introduction to a professional environment and being sort of an ambassador for something was very new to this student. They thought that they were there to be just an older student. So seeing from that perspective what is, required or demanded was helpful for that student or that peer mentor. And we didn't have any other issues like that. But that was one that I remember going, because it was my second semester here. And I thought, uh-oh, this is not a good one. Yep. So it will happen occasionally. I've also had peer mentors that maybe turned an eye when their friends were absent from class, but would point out if anyone else was absent in class. And so just again, that reminder of your role in this class is as an employee of the university is usually quite helpful. And I think helpful for them as they go to other jobs outside of this experience.
Mm-hmm. I had my first semester, I had a student who every week was asking, a peer mentor every week asking, I'd really like to show this video in class. I think it'd be really good. I think it'd be really helpful. And I was like, okay, they had grown a lot. They'd kind of proven themselves in the role and thought, okay, yeah, let's do that. And I made the mistake of not previewing it myself. And in multiple ways, it just didn't fit. Just wasn't what we needed. And so and again, this kind of, I think, falls back on my K-12 time of working with student teachers. We got to talk about knowing your audience. We got to talk about appropriateness of various materials in class. And it, it was a little awkward there in the moment in class, but we talked through it and then it was fine. And that student worked with me as a peer mentor for 2 semesters after that. And so, it didn't hurt the relationship. It didn't make it really awkward the rest of those 3 semesters. It was just a good accountability, both for them and for me. So that experience also did impact how I talk with peer mentors about when they choose to create or bring in instructional materials to class. Yeah.
I've got one thing to add. In the fall, I had 2 peer mentors in different sections. And I think because it was my first semester and I wasn't really sure how I wanted to use the peer mentors, and it was a new experience. I think that I didn't fully communicate all of my expectations with them, and I think that was a mistake in that one of my peer mentors was a little bit less engaged and involved, and the other one was really, really proactive. And so I think that it was not the fault of the first one that she was more disengaged. I think she was looking to me to set a tone, set expectations, kind of communicate more with her. And I just didn't do a good job of kind of establishing that framework for her. Whereas the other student, she just kind of pushed through my sort of passivity or not really knowing what to do or what was going on. And she sort of took charge and made space for herself in the class, which was great and good for her. And it was really successful. But I do think that it makes sense that the peer mentors kind of look to their professors to set the tone, to set the expectations, and to kind of follow their lead. And so I think that's just something to keep in mind, to be sort of intentional and purposeful about including peer mentors in your class, and not kind of go on autopilot and just be well, they know what they're doing, or I'll just let them do whatever they want or whatever, it's a more active relationship if it's going to be really successful. So that's just one experience I had.
Just one other thing that I thought of, one of the things that when we talked in my classes about registration, that's my first semester, that was where I realized, okay, we need to kind of put some parameters on the conversation about registration. So instead of just, here's how you do it, it was, but you really want this professor because they do this, and you really won't like this one because this and that. And so, you know, we kind of stopped and talked, and I did my best to kind of figure out what to do with that. But it was another really good chance to talk about, like Heather had said, the awkward role in some ways that they fill in the classroom, but that ultimately they are in there as a university representative. And so it was a good chance for us to talk about how they communicated those things. And that, you know, I didn't need them to be a walking ratemyprofessor.com. I just needed them to be a resource to help students think through what they wanted from a professor. And so that was a bit awkward, but led to a really good outcome.
Brittany, do you have anything to add? Or you just been that lucky that there's been no issues?
Well, the challenge for me, especially honestly, fall and spring, but mostly fall, was relinquishing control. That was tough for me. And I realized after that, well, I chuckled when Katie said that when her peer mentors just kind of made space for themselves. I had one who did the same thing this past fall. And in a moment, I was like, oh, okay. But in the end, I realized that it was good for the peer mentor and for me to teach me how to trust my peer mentor, because again, majority of them, they're highly motivated students. They're students who love AUM. They love working with their peers, or they love being serving as a peer mentor. So allow them the space to do that. And so I would say my challenge was letting go of the control and letting the peer mentor be a peer mentor and use their skill set, use their passion, and do more things, and not just be a passive participant in my classrooms.
I think here, when I get emails about, hey, my peer mentor isn't doing what I want them to do, or I'm having an issue with my peer mentor, it usually originates from a couple of things. It's one, the professor has not set expectations clearly with the peer mentor. So the peer mentor is like, I don't really know what to do. But then they end up still kind of getting in trouble for it, so to speak. And then the other part is that the professor just isn't quite sure how to utilize the peer mentor. And so then there's like a miscommunication of responsibilities and what would be appropriate or not. And then I find sometimes that it's because really that professor isn't taking that time to do those weekly meetings or conversations so that you guys can kind of work through whatever it is. And ultimately, just communicating with your peer mentor is the best way to resolve any kind of issue, and know that not every peer mentor is going to be the same as the one you had previously, or, you know, meet your expectations 100%, because they're just, it's like any other relationship you have. You have to kind of work through it. So on that note, is there any other questions that you guys can think of or comments that you want to make in closing? No? Well, awesome. I really appreciate all of you guys taking the time out to come and talk about peer mentors. And when we do our peer mentor training in August, I hope that you guys will all kind of maybe be involved in some way to help share your experiences and expertise in this area. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next time. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
guys.